Hey folks, how you guys doing? Hope you're all having a great day today. This is Tool Talk number 16, and the whole point of this Tool Talk series is to have a place or a destination I can point people to in regards to the commonly asked questions that I get about my tools. And the subject of this video is this Hammer A3-41 jointer planer combination machine. And right off the bat, I have absolutely nothing to gain or lose whether you do or do not buy this machine. I just do not care at all. If this is the machine for you, cool. If it's not the machine for you, cool. I don't care. This video is just hopefully an information type video on this machine. So if you're not familiar with Hammer, Hammer is a division or a sub-brand, I'm not exactly sure how that works, of Felder. And Felder is an Austrian company that makes some really nice quality machines. And that's exactly what this is. It's a quality jointer planer combination machine. I've had it for about 5 months, I guess, and I've ran a couple hundred board feet through it, several hundred board feet through it, I would say. Familiar with it, and I feel comfortable talking about it now. So one of the most common questions is it worth the money to buy a machine like this? And that's an impossible question for me to answer because all of us work different in our shops. All of us have different workflows. We value things differently. And I'm not in the market of spending your money either. So as far as worth, one of the things that I would make, it makes more sense for me to make an apples to apples comparison here. So if you're in the market for a sports car, a Chevy Camaro, it doesn't make sense to justify or not justify the cost of that car based upon the cost of a Chevy Malibu. They're two completely different things. So just to throw out some numbers and make an instant cost comparison as far as value goes, I'm going to compare this 16-inch jointer planer combo to the same capacity from two different brands. We'll just say Grizzly and Powermatic, and neither one of those two companies, Grizzly or Powermatic, offer a 16-inch planer, so we'll just say a 15-inch planer. That's the closest to it. And all of the tools that I looked up the price for have the helical head or spiral head where they have carbide inserts rather than the traditional straight knives. So with all that said, if you were to get a 16-inch jointer and a 15-inch planer from Grizzly, not including shipping on any of these numbers. From Grizzly, you're going to spend $9,790. The same capacity in Powermatic, you're going to spend $12,200. And to get basically the same capacity out of this machine, 1 inch more as far as the planer goes, you're going to spend a considerable amount less at $6,708. So as far as an apples to apples comparison, as far as capacity, machine capacity, it's actually a lot less money than other options out there. Now that, as far as it being worth it to you, like I said, it's totally up. It's a personal decision and how you work in your shop. So with that out of the way, I'm gonna bring you in closer and we'll start with the cutter head. As I said, this is a 16-inch long cutter head, and you can see all these little carbide inserts. I don't know how many are on this cutter head. I do have the power in the locked off position, by the way. I don't know how many of these carbide inserts are on this cutter head, but there are a lot, and they are tightly placed. This is a helical head and not a spiral head. Now, Hammer calls this their silent power cutter head. And I don't know if there's anything specific to the geometry that they're using here, but basically the general difference between a helical head and a spiral head is that a spiral head has the carbide inserts with the cutting edge attacking the wood along its entire length at the same time. So this will be straight with the jointer beds here, whereas in a helical head has them skewed or slightly twisted off to one side so that the cut starts on one side and ends over here, which means this is making a skew cut rather than the entire knife gouging in at one time. You're supposedly going to get a little bit better result when the insert is skewed slightly, just like it is right here. So if there's any advice I can give anybody with in the market of either upgrading or getting a new or new to you jointer or planer, it is that if possible, get one with carbide inserts in the cutter head, because these last so much longer than traditional straight knives. Now you can get carbide straight knives, but these last so much longer and produce such a good quality cut. The cool thing is there's 4 cutting edges here, so if one edge gets dinged up, say you accidentally run a nail through, then you can just simply take the damaged one and rotate it 90 degrees. But if these all get dull over time, then you rotate all of them 90 degrees, and you can do that up to 3 times, including the first original edge, which means you have 4 cutting edges per insert, and they just last so much longer. I had a 8-inch grizzly jointer before this one, and it had carbide inserts in the cutter head. I had it for about 3 years, something like that, and ran a tremendous amount of wood through it, some not so good wood through it as well, dirty wood, and the day I got rid of it, it was still on the original cutting edge on the carbide inserts. So it was still going strong on those same cutting edges, and I expect the same amount of life out of these. They're just going to last so much longer, and there's less maintenance involved as far as having to reset the height for each one of the knives to the bed. But then again, there are a lot of screws here when you got to rotate everything. So anyway, my recommendation is carbide insert helical or spiral cutter head over traditional straight knives any day. This is 16 inches wide, which means it does require quite a bit of power if you're going to be cutting through a dense hardwood at full width. There is a 4 horsepower motor on this machine, and I've ran 13-inch wide Babinga through here. That's the widest that I've. No, actually, I ran a 15 or 16-inch wide hickory cutting board as well, and I don't recall ever noticing anything in regards to the power not being sufficient. It made the cut just fine. So that's 2 things that I've done relatively full width in some dense woods, and it just powered through it, which is exactly what you want. I moved the fence out of the way so we could see the cutter head. So next up is the fence, and it's a T-square style fence, kind of like a Biesmeyer table saw fence. This T-square side goes on this rail on the right side of the infeed table, and then there is another knob that goes over here that locks it all in place. So if you need to make an adjustment, you loosen both of these, slide it where you need to slide it, lock this one down first, and then lock this one down right here. As this moves all the way through, back and forth, it remains square to the table. You do have some adjustment through this mechanism right here, and there are some stop blocks. Very simple setup. So as far as this being 90 degrees to the table, it is only as accurate as you set it. And if you set it accurate, then it's repeatable stops. You just go as needed, back and forth, as far as whatever angle you want. And if your stop blocks are set accurately, it will indeed come back to 90 degrees every single time, which is really cool. Now, the only complaint that a lot of people seem to have with this type of setup is this is, as you can see, extruded aluminum. So people often ask if this is as rigid or is it as nice as a cast iron fence. Well, as far as nice goes, that's irrelevant. It just simply needs to be rigid, and this is rigid enough. Obviously, aluminum is not as rigid as cast iron, but it's rigid enough. And let me move the camera to the other side and kind of explain that a little more. So you can briefly see these angled supports back here on this side of the fence, on the infeed side of the fence over here. So this is where you have all of your support as far as this tilting back, and this is where you're starting your cut anyway. You want to have your material up against the fence as you start jointing. Now, as you start jointing, you're creating a flat spot on the bottom, so pressure into the fence isn't as necessary as it is over here because you do have a flat reference face that you are creating. So once you get over here, you don't need a tremendous amount of force into the fence. This is, like I said, very similar to like a Biesmeyer style T-square fence. So the main clamping area, or the main lockdown area is over here. This isn't going to move in this direction at all. And then we have a small piece back here to lock the rest of the fence. All of this is fine. But the further you get over here, that's where you have unsupported fence. There's nothing behind here. This is just a piece of aluminum, so there might be a little bit of flex. And as a matter of fact, there is flex if you put excessive force on here. So I don't know if it's going to pick up on camera, but I'm moving that by like a millimeter or so. And that's because there's not much support back here, but it's unnecessary. It doesn't matter. When you're pushing your material through, you don't need a tremendous amount of force up against the fence way over here. Back over here where it matters, there's no movement when you're pushing into the fence, and as you're jointing your material, like I said, you don't need to put a lot of force that way. So this obviously isn't as rigid as a cast iron fence, but it simply does not need to be. Next up is the blade guard, and as you can see, it's not right here. I have it flipped up over here, so if you ever need to get it out of the way, there's a locking arm right here that allows you to get it out of the way. And I typically put this one over there simply because, when I'm not using it, simply because I don't have much walk space or walkway through here, so I just get it out of the way. And I leave it over there when I put this thing into planer mode. But this arm or handle flips up. All this flips over. You align this as necessary. This locks back into place. And then from here, you can use this knob to lock the guard in place this way. And this knob adjusts your elevation. So it's it's completely different than a typical North American style, pork chop style guard. But it's neither a benefit or disadvantage in my opinion. It's completely neutral. It's just different. You do have to set up the guard every time, and very simple. But the guard goes into the fence like so for face jointing, and then you can set your depth by lowering this down so that it barely touches the wood. And then you can push your material through. And the biggest difference is the pork chop style guard will get out of the way and then spring back into place as the board is being passed through. This is stationary, so as you pass your material through, you're pushing it with your hands, and then you just glide your first hand over, glide your second hand over, and if you're used to a North American style pork chop guard, it's just weird at first. It's just something you're not used to, but after 4 or 5 passes, it's just a different process to get used to it. There's nothing to it. And like I said, I don't think it's a benefit or a disadvantage either way. It's just a different way of doing things. I will say, the only thing that I would prefer the pork chop style spring-loaded guard for instead of this one is the fact that this over here, if you're not using the full width, this sticks out, and as you push your material through, it's still always in your way. So you have to get around it sometimes to get the material. Not the end of the world, but I will give advantage to the pork chop style guard in that regard. But no big deal. Now edge jointing, this gets lowered down to the table. And then this slides out the width that you need to edge joint. So it covers up the vast majority of the blade. When you push it through, you still have a little bit exposed, but it's not much at all. Again, a lot of people make a big deal about this being different than the traditional pork chop style guard. I don't think it's a big deal at all. I just think it's different. That's simply all there is to it. It's just different. The most common question by far is, how long does it take to switch between the two? Is that a big inconvenience? And does it negatively affect your workflow having to switch between the two? It doesn't negatively affect the workflow much at all. Obviously, there is some time invested in switching between the two, but it's not much at all. It's about a minute. And really, when you're in the groove of moving around and doing stuff, you can get it done really fast. And as far as having to switch back and forth throughout a project, or if you forget to joint a board, or you have to go back to jointer mode after you're in place, it's not that big of a deal. It is a big deal if, for instance, you are a high volume production shop. At that point, it doesn't make sense to have a combination machine. It makes much more sense to have dedicated machines to where you to where they're always set up and ready to go. But as far as switching this, it doesn't take much time at all. There is a few things that you have to do, a little sequence of events, I guess. The fence has to be in a certain position forward so that the support arm on the back side of the fence doesn't bend on the back of the machine. And I have a little mark that I put on my fence or fence rail over here so I know exactly where to push it forward. This blade guard can stay right here, but this guard is in the way of me lifting up, so I always remove it. Now, this can be removed right there, and this is conveniently stored on the back side of the fence inside the tilting mechanism, and it'll stay there if this lifts up. But taking this out and putting it back in every time, to me, is not as convenient as simply lifting this up, getting this out of the way like so, and letting it stay over there when I switch over to planar mode. So I always flip it up out of the way. Now, the fence has to come forward. Actually, you know what? I'll start the timer or whatever to see how long this takes. So in my case, the fence comes forward into a certain spot. This gets locked down. The dust collection over here gets pulled off, comes around this side, and I just droop it down or drape it over the infeed side over here. These two arms get unlocked. The whole tables will lift up and set out of the way. The dust shroud comes over here. Dust collection gets plugged in. And this is the part that everyone complains about, and that is lifting this table because it has to be 6.5 inches of depth for jointer mode, but you need to put it up obviously to the height that you need for thicknessing. And while this is going on, there's also one more knob over here that is to activate the rollers. So rollers activated, tables at 1.9 inches, and then you can lock it down and start planing. So, talking while doing that kind of got me out of breath, but that didn't take a tremendous amount of time at all. And again, switching back and forth between the two, it is now in jointer or planar mode. So to switch back to jointer mode, this gets disconnected. The rollers are deactivated. Loosen the table lock, drop this all the way down to about 6.5 inches. And again, I put a little mark on this scale so I know where to stop. The dust shroud comes back over here. There's a little lock holding the tables up. Pull it out of the way. Tables come down. Lock it into place. Lock it into place. Dust collection back over here into the shroud, and then this back into place. It is kind of a little sequence of things to do, but it's not that big of a deal. I much prefer the benefit of the capacity of the machine more so than the inconvenience of having to switch between the two. Somebody did ask how heavy these tables are, if they're too heavy to move. They are big pieces of metal, so they're not light by any means, but they're not unbearable, and they're loosely connected by a bar in the middle, so you can get a hold of both, but with one handle. But inside here are some springs to help offset the weight just a little bit. And once you go all the way up to the complete vertical position, there's a little locking knob on this side to prevent them from falling down to you. So that's as far as they'll come to me until I lift up this little piece of metal. Now they'll come down all the way. And like I said, it's not super light, but it's not anything unbearable. It's not crazy heavy. Here's a little closer look at everything on the planar side as far as the controls. This is the knob to lock the table elevation, And a lot of people ask about snipe on this machine. So long as the table elevation is locked, I don't get any snipe. If I leave it unlocked, I get snipe. So there's that. This has to be unlocked in order for the table to be adjusted. And this is the factory scale right here, and you see a little red line I struck with a marker, and that's the line that lets me know how far I need to go down to switch back and forth between the modes. And this is the knob that I said controls the planar rollers. You don't need the planar rollers to be rolling when you're in jointer mode. So this is in jointer mode right now, and I struck a line on it and put joint on it. And if I pull backwards, lift up, now it is in planar mode and the rollers are activated. And again, I struck a line and wrote plane on it. So at a glance, I can just look at it and see what line is touching the machine and know if I have the rollers activated or not. But that needs to be switched when you go back and forth between the two modes. This dial indicator inside the wheel is something that I purchased for this, and the wheel I think was I think about $150 extra, which is a little bit pricey. I'd like to see that lower, but this is actually really, really, really nice. And the fact that every revolution is shown right here, it's a dial indicator. So right now I've got the inch measurement and it's at 4.73. So if I plane a board right now at 4.73 and stick a dial indicator, or I'm sorry, stick some calipers on it, it's going to be exactly 4.73, which is really, really nice. If you're trying to hit a number, say 0.75 inches, then you go all the way up to the thing that says 0.75, plane your board, and that's exactly what you're going to get. That is awesome. This dial indicator in here is installed by you, the user. So how well you install it determines how well or how accurate it's going to be. But it's super simple. Basically, you plane a board. Let's just say I planed a board, and at this particular table elevation, the board is showing at 1 inch on my calipers. Then I take this center dial, and in my hand, I spin it until it says 1.00, exactly 1 inch. And then I install it and lock it with a set screw so that this dial indicator is calibrated to the position of this table. And then, of course, make some height adjustments here to a different number, plane it, check it with your calipers, and see that they are the same. And once it's accurate, it's a set it and forget it kind of thing. This is fantastic. I absolutely love this. It's just it's just pricey. So there's that. But anyway, lots of revolutions to get in between jointer and planar mode. And a couple solutions to this I've seen. Ramon Valdez, I believe that's his name, Ramon Artful on Instagram. He just put an auxiliary gear over here and then a gear on the back side and has it chain driven between the two, so we can use a drill right here to spin this very fast. That's one solution. I've seen another solution on Instagram, and I forget the guy's name. I'll put it on here. I'm going blank. I apologize. But basically a circle piece of plywood with some dowels to go through it to index it over this handle, and then one hole to go over this handle, and then use that in a drill to manually spin this, or to automatically spin this with a drill. I don't see any personal need to add anything to make this process faster, because in my opinion, if it's down here all the way down for the shroud to fit in jointer mode and I switch back and forth, I'm going to spend just about the same amount of time going to go find the drill and the attachment necessary to speed up this process than I would to simply just raise it up. So right there, I'm at 0.75 inches, which that wasn't a tremendous amount of time. Lock it in, activate the rollers, ready to plane. The mobile base is another accessory that was a little on the high side in my opinion. It's about $200 for the wheel and axle that goes through the backside, 2 wheels and 1 axle, and then this handle, which you can purchase separately, and of course this piece right here in the front. So the handle, you can see it over there. I keep the adjustment handle sitting underneath the machine because I don't have to move this often. And there's a peg or a bolt in the bottom side of here, or the top side of this handle, and I can set it in place. And what you do is you just lift down, and it's a mechanical advantage. It makes moving this around extremely easy. The thing that I don't like about it is the fact that those wheels back there in the back are stationary, so you have to wiggle it in place if I want to move it this way. So I don't have to move it often, but yeah, I'm not crazy impressed with the mobile base. It does the job just fine though. One of the questions that I got was why not use one of the commercially available bases with 4 casters? And the reason I didn't go that route is the footprint of this machine. I couldn't find one that had the footprint that I needed, as well as the weight capacity that I needed. This machine is 880 pounds, which is kind of heavy. So I just figured I'll just go with the one that's made for the machine. Now, every time I show the bottom of this machine, someone yells at me for using a shim here. Why not just use the leveling feet? And the reason being is nowhere in my shop, this garage floor, nowhere is it actually flat. There's a lot of low spots, and with an item that has 4 points of contact, it's extremely difficult to find a spot where all 4 points are touching the ground. So I simply just kick the wedge underneath the low spot on the floor and don't even worry at all about leveling the leveling feet. But yeah, the mobile base, it works really well, but it's kind of pricey. A lot of questions in regard to the dust collection. It's a 16-inch wide cutter head, and is a 4-inch port good enough for the 16-inch width cutter head? And I would say it's acceptable. Look around right here. You can see a bunch of dust, or chips, I should say. It's one of those things that I feel like it doesn't spew up a bunch of the small little fine dust. And that's evident by my air quality monitor not spiking when I'm using this machine. But it doesn't get all of the larger chips like this. So as I'm planing a board, especially at the end of the cut, simply because it's a planer, as the board goes through the cutter head, when the back side of the board reaches the end of the cutter head, there's no wood on the other side of it, so there's always a little bit of a line of material that gets shot out the other side. That's the exact same as it was on my last planer. So it's not flawless. I still get these larger chips, but it's not unbearable by any means. It's just the same as my last planer setup. Now, as far as jointer mode, it does really good in jointer mode, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that me personally pushing the wood through, I'm going slower than the rollers are pulling the wood through in planer mode. So I am personally slower than this machine is in planer mode. So dust collection, not flawless by any means, but acceptable. I forgot to mention that this adapter is a little custom adapter I made. So the port on the shroud from the factory is, if I'm not mistaken, this port has a 120 millimeter outside diameter, and I couldn't find anything to fit. I didn't really look that hard, to be honest with you. So I used my CNC machine to make this 4-ring stack, and these 2 rings over here are MDF, and the interior diameter of these 2 rings matches the 120 millimeter outside diameter of this port, and then these 2 rings on this side are plywood, just using up some crap material that I had, and these have an interior diameter that matches the outside diameter of this Rockler Dust Right attachment. So it fits in there nice and easily. I had to notch out for this handle, but this is a little homemade solution that I clamped together, spray painted it black just so it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb from a distance, but if you look close, it doesn't look good at all. But it works really well, and it's convenient for this to attach and be removed as necessary. This is hot glued to, the ring assembly is hot glued to this original port, and it doesn't move at all. This is just a nice slip fit, and it works really well, very convenient. The last thing I'll cover in this video is a question about the planer, and do I have enough in-feed and out-feed support? Do I feel like I need more in-feed and out-feed support? There have been several solutions online to add your own in-feed and out-feed support to the planer bed to lengthen it by just a little bit. There are some accessories that you can purchase from the manufacturer to do that. I haven't come across a need for that. I had a DeWalt DW735 planer before this, and I had it both with the in-feed and out-feed tables and without the in-feed and out-feed tables. And while it is a little bit more convenient with the tables, they simply fell off during operation one day as I was using the machine, and I never put them back on. And I guess I got used to not really having any in-feed and out-feed support. So for me, this isn't a concern. The longest stuff I've ran through here is some 8-foot long stuff, and it's not really a concern for me to add any in-feed and out-feed support. That's not saying that I won't at some time down the road, but right now this is working out just fine with the factory table on here. That's where I'm going to end this video, though. I've got a bunch of specific questions that would probably make this video extremely long, so I'm just going to answer all these in the website article. That's just the basics, or the main points, I guess, on this machine. I like it. It's got plenty of power to do what I need it to do. It's got plenty of power to make a maximum capacity cut, and I'm not seeing any issues with accuracy. So there's that. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to email me or leave a comment on my website article, and I'll be sure to answer those. You guys take care, have a great day, and I'll talk to you in the next video.